Heck, it's a buff gnome! What on earth is going on here? Steve gasped out and waved at the figure on the stage. A gnome with muscles! That's just unnatural, I tell you. Unnatural! Against the laws of nature. He's like as wide as he is tall. He's practically a cube! You could use him as building material. Steve, why are you going on about this? Sherry arched a brow as she gave him a concerned look. I've never seen a buff gnome before. I didn't even know it was possible. Just weirding me out? Steve shrugged. No, behold the peak of any male performance, for I am Chad, king of the Burlosophers. At that, a figure came up at the back of the stage that made the party blink a little as they examined the obscene mound of muscle that somehow walked into view of the others. If anything, the man making his way forward didn't make Steve think of performance at all. It looked to him more like one of those skinless horrors with enlarged muscles from blood magic. It was as if every muscle on the man's body had tripled in size, the skin and veins looking entirely too taut to be healthy. Chad! 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 All around, the other Burlosophers began to chant his name as some pounded on their chests and grunted. The mound of muscle before them strutted around, posing still, his hands and feet looking far too small for the rest of the body, and Steve noticed he even had a strange hue to his skin color that looked orange. Hey, fuckwits! He finally called out to stop the display. Ooh! Ooh! Around him, startled Burlosophers looked at the party, grunting and making noises as they finally paid attention to them. Ah! Who dare disturb Chad in his court? The figure known as Chad demanded from the top of the stage. The other Burlosophers backed up to let the group forward. I'm Steve Spellslinger, and this is Doom! The thunder and lightning made many of the Burlosophers around them back up, hopping around in anxiety as they grunted in confusion and surprise. And I want access to the library. Ah! The library is part of Chad's domain. None but the chosen bros who most broify the commandments may enter. He pointed then at the sign to the building that used to be the temple. Steve looked back to read it more properly. It was a list of commandments for the Burlosophers. Mostly they were about something called gains, and no carbs. Yeah, fuck that noise. We're going to challenge you to a bro down to become the new Burlosopher king, Steve replied after a moment. Bro down, bro down, bro down, bro down. Various Burlosophers around them chanted and grunted as many pounded their chests. What? You dare challenge Chad? The true Burlosopher king to a bro down? You're not even fit, bro, and you dare challenge me, the mighty faggot? Chad strutted around and posed further. See, he says it like it's a good thing, Fenrina mentioned. Trust me, it's not. Steve shook his head. And I'm not going to challenge you. She is. He waved at Fenrina, who gave a surprised look, her tongue flapping from the corner of her mouth again. Oh? Am I going to be king of something else? She asked. What? Steve frowned. You've never been king of anything. Wasn't I? What was that bit where I rolled around and shanked that guy who shit on the floor? She asked. When we dethroned the Kasurian king? No. That didn't make you king, you can't. He sighed and shook his head. Were you even paying attention? Fenrina just shrugged. I kinda hate that you're the best tank I've ever worked with, he muttered. Aw, you think I'm the best? Thanks. She gave him a big goofy smile, as she kept her tongue dangling from the side of her mouth. That's not... Steve shook his head once more. Never mind, yes. Take it as a compliment. Anyway, yes, she's here to challenge you. Steve waved at the entity known as Chad. Well, this cannot be! That bro is no bro, and the non-bro is a dog! Steve really wished Chad's volume could be adjusted. Are you saying you hate dogs? Steve loudly asked. Are you telling me that the Burlosopher king hates dogs? There isn't a bro here who will defend a poor dog? He kept loudly asking, which finally got the Burlosophers around him to start grunting out as they processed that. Yo, dog! You can't hate dogs, dog. That's not very bro. Bro, dogs are cool, dog. Ah! You have trapped Chad in the complexities of social normality. Even Chad is beholden to social convention. Ah! You win this round. The thing that was Chad grunted out in annoyance. Very well, there shall be a bro down, a competition of physical performance and peakness to determine the rightful brolosifer king. Chad raised his arms up as much as he could with all the muscles in the way as the rest of the bros grunt and chanted. I've seen actual apes with more sophistication, Sherry muttered as the bros assembled for the bro down. Clear the stage! Ah! Chad waved off the brolosifers on the stage with him and waited for Fenrina to climb up alongside him, which was when they realized just how big Chad was. Fenrina was easily 7 feet tall, and Chad was another foot above that. Steve wondered if he was a half-giant, but the normal signs had been hidden by the obscenity of his body structure. First, the challenge of peak appearance. Behold all that is swole. Chad! Ah! Chad began to strut around and pose once more as the brolosifers let out grunts of appreciation. When he was done, Fenrina looked around and blinked in confusion. She looked to Steve for help, who quickly slipped behind Sherry and reached around her to point at her chest while nodding. Stop that! Sherry smacked Steve's poking hands away, but Fenrina got the idea. Hello, I'm Fenrina. I'm a werehusky. I'm a person dog who's also a dog person. She laughed at that as everyone just sort of watched in confusion. Ooh, I crack myself up. Anyway, I'm kind of fit. She pulled the straps of her armor to slip it off and reveal her much more simple tunic beneath that would more easily show her form. Then she struck a quick pose to show off her arms that had been honed by adventuring and her natural strength. And also, I have tits, she happily proclaimed and bounced a bit as she clutched the front of her tunic. Bro, I thought those were just sweet pecs, dog. Dog. It's a dog. With tits, dog. That's the fucking sweetest thing ever. Swole and tits? Can the world withstand such greatness? All around them, the brolosifers began to grunt and hop around as they pointed at Fentinra. Ah, no! Chad growled out, as in the background a dwarf muscle cube ground his fist into a stone wall to carve out the names Chad and Fenrina before then carving a hash mark beneath Fenrina's name. No! Chad is peak maleness. You are supposed to appreciate swole maleness. But bro, we became swole to get chicks, didn't we? Cha bro, we became swole for chicks. As if there's a question, I dink. The brolosifers began to muddle around a little, seeming confused all of a sudden. No! This is subjective. I use my power as brolosifer king to have this competition struck from the record, Chad roared out. The dwarf in the back grunted and then picked up some of the stone rubble and slammed it back into the hash mark to cover up Fenrina's point. On to objective physical performance! It is time for the dwarf toss! There was much grunting then as a dwarf, not the apparent record keeper, climbed onto the stage. This was the one with the muscular beard that had smaller muscular beards. Chad strutted around a minute as they both posed for the crowd of grunting brolosifers. Then Chad lifted the dwarf up and tossed him off the side of the stage at a long pit of sand. The dwarf flew across it before landing in the sand and sliding several more feet before finally coming to a stop. All around, the brolosifers pounded their chests. All right, Larry, get your fat ass up there. Steve nodded at the stage. Larry objects to this idea. Larry does not want to be the dwarf toss. Larry complained. You always object to everything. Get your ass up there, Steve growled. Larry will have his revenge, the dwarf muttered as he headed up to the stage. Yeah. Steve shrugged it off. Once Larry was on stage, the dwarf just stood beside Fenrina and waited. What are you doing? Take your armor off, Steve instructed. Larry does not feel comfortable displaying his supple chocolate body before such a crowd. Larry muttered. Are you kidding me? You strip down at the first opportunity constantly. Is it because they're all men? Strip, you weenie. Steve waved at him angrily. No, it's okay, Steve. It'll be fine. Just means I gotta toss a heavier dwarf. I don't mind. Fenrina waved him off with her usual smile as she took the time to stretch. Bro, that dog is making it harder on herself just so her bro doesn't feel uncomfortable. What a bro. I know, bro. That dog is such a dog to that bro. Steve noticed the brolosifers around them were responding well to Fenrina's decision, so he just shrugged it off and let her do it her way. When she was finally ready and well stretched, she picked Larry up, spinning around in place several times before hurling him forward. With the built-up momentum, and her practice of tossing Larry the dwarf sailed high and far, well over the other dwarf's still face planted in the sand. And in fact, he cleared the sand pit entirely and had just enough time to shout, "Larry hates you all!" before landing on the ground with a meaty thunk, sliding a few feet, and then just lying there. All around, the Brolosophers chanted and grunted, but Fenrina gasped. Steve, is he okay?" Steve squinted at the dwarf in the distance and saw him twitch. He's fine. Probably just a concussion or mild head trauma. Nothing to worry about. Back to the bro down." He waved off her concerns as the Brolosophers pounded their chests. What is this? How can it be that spinning made your dwarf fly further? Chad is perplexed and outraged, Chad growled out. But even so, the dwarf in the back smashed apart the stone to show Fenrina had 1 point. "Fine. Chad will accept this objective loss, but you have much further to go to be made Brolosopher king. It is now the turn of the challenger to pick." Fenrina gave them a blank look, and her tongue flopped out in thought as she tried to come up with a challenge. "Scratch your back," Steve called out. "What? What kind of challenge is that? It does not display the raw power of being swole," Chad cried out. "It's a physical test. Do it," Steve shouted back. "Very well. Chad must accept." Then they all watched as the figure tried to twist his arms back to scratch his back. He began to even spin around a little, trying to make it work, but his arms were so muscular he couldn't manage it. "What? This is trickery. Chad is most swole. How can he not scratch his back? Someone must have poisoned Chad's powder with carbs." "Well, I can do it." Fenrina shrugged and reached back to scratch her own back. It's not as good as when someone else does it." She lets out the weary sigh of a dog who finally got hands good enough to scratch themselves, only to discover it's just not the same. "Wah! No! The less swole win again? This is unacceptable!" Chad cried out as the dwarf in the back slammed another point for Fenrina into the stone. "Chad will end this charade. We now undertake the most important of tasks befitting a Brolosopher king. Who can pick up more chicks?" Chad roared out to much grunting of approval from the Brolosophers around them. "Rules!" Steve cried out over their noise. "What?" Chad gasped out. "We need rules. Picking up chicks doesn't mean to literally pick them up, just so you know," he called out. "Chad is aware of this," Chad declared. "Right, then we make it. Who can get more women to go with them to the park?" he suggested, and Fenrina perked up at the mention of a park. "Chad finds this acceptable. A park is a public place for further display. Chad swole while dating," Chad agreed as the other Brolosophers grunted and nodded. With that, Chad and Fenrina hopped off the stage to walk to the entrance to the gymnasium. Most of the Brolosophers cautiously peered out from around the edges of the gate and walls, seemingly confused and worried about the world beyond. Chad took up a position in the middle of the street then and posed. "Chad is peak! Look at Chad!" With that began several minutes of Chad posing at various women who walked past, only to scurry away when he yelled at them about how swole he was and things like that. There was much murmuring as his tactics failed to earn him a date. "Right, you've had enough time. Get out of there," Steve called out after Chad scared off yet another woman on the street. "Chad does not understand. Chad is most swole of swole. His form demands worship. What vile carb sorcery is this?" he cried out in anguish. "But it does not matter, for the she-dog will be unable to secure a date," he confidently added as he walked back in. Fenrina just waited out in the middle of the street then, tail wagging. "Hi! Hello! Hi there!" She would wave and smile at the people passing by, man and woman alike, just as super friendly as could be. "Fenrina, you have to ask them if they want to go to the park with you," Steve reminded her. "Oh yeah." She gave him a happy smile and waited for the next woman to walk past. "Hello there. I'm Fenrina." I'm Helen?" the woman said, sort of confused by the large werehusky before her. "Hi, Helen. That's a very nice name. Would you like to go to the park with me?" "I'd really like to go to the park with you," Fenrina cheerfully asked. The woman looked around a moment and then shrugged. "Sure?" "Yes, we get to go to the park!" Fenrina bounced happily. What? No! This is impossible! Chad has lost 3 challenges? Chad isn't the Brolosopher King? No! This can't be happening! I blame carbs! No! Chad cried out and then shuddered as his body began to convulse and spasm. Steve and Sherry backed away as an orange cloud suddenly erupted from his mouth, flying off into the sky as the body began to shrink. Oh! He was possessed by something! I possibly should have known that, Steve muttered as they watched the figure that was Chad get smaller. He half expected the body to turn into a shriveled, tiny little man, but to his surprise, the figure that remained, while shorter than Steve, was still fairly fit-looking, just not as obscenely as the rest of the Brolosophers. He was completely bald and had fuzzy white eyebrows that looked somewhat like Steve's spare eyebrows, and a very long white beard. Bro? Is he gonna be okay, bro? The Brolosophers began to crowd around to look at the old man who collapsed to the ground. Back up! Back up! Steve waved the concerned Brolosophers away and leaned down to look over the body. He's trying to say something, Steve mentioned and leaned close. Carbs! Please, I need carbs, the old man whispered. Carbs! Does anyone have carbs? Steve asked. Ah, perhaps I can be of assistance. The shady baker from earlier appeared rather suddenly as he opened his robe to reveal various rolls, breads, and pastries. Yees, look at my wonderful selection of carbs, but it'll cost you a steep price. Yeah, give me a roll or I stab you in the throat, Steve counter-offered. 1 carb coming up, free of charge. The baker quickly tossed over a pastry to Steve, who carefully fed it to the old man. He carefully took a few bites and then a few more, as he began to show a little more energy. Steve noticed his flesh also no longer had that odd orange hue. Carbs? So good. I don't know how long I've been possessed by that thing. It promised me great muscles and easy gains. I was tempted by its promise, he revealed, then saw Fenrina standing by with the concerned Brolosophers. Is that a dog with tits? Hi, I'm Fenrina, she happily waved. That's so sweet! The man groaned and fell asleep, obviously worn out by the ordeal. Bro, I feel like I don't want to work out today, one of the Brolosophers mentioned. Yeah, I remember coming here because someone said it was all supportive about getting fit, but then something happened, another added. Classic signs of cult possession. But what was that thing? Steve asked and looked at Sherry, who shrugged. Does this mean I'm not really a Brolosopher King now? Fenrina asked. I mean, I guess you kind of are, but you'll be heading out with us soon anyway, so I'm not sure it matters. Steve shrugged. Well then, I appoint that guy as Brolosopher King. She pointed at the shady baker. Yes, now the man with the carbs is king. Muahahahahaha! The baker cackled. Free carbs. The first taste is always free. Bwahahaha! With that, the now less brainwashed Brolosophers began to crowd around to get some carbs that they so missed. Also, does this mean I can't go to the park? Fenrina asked. Nah, feel free. Steve figured it might be easier to organize things without Fenrina around anyway, but didn't say that. Yes, the park! Fenrina hopped up and then ran down the street in a full sprint, only to sprint back. I don't know where the park is, she happily exclaimed. I do, Helen mentioned. I'll take you there. Yes, you're great! Fenrina happily bounced, running around Helen, who began to lead her off. Okay! Steve sighed as he checked the passed-out old man once more and stood up. I'll get him someplace to recover and then find what I need in the library. You start checking out the temple and finding out whatever it was that let these guys get so grotesque. We'll need to destroy it. Don't you think your military might want some? Sherry asked. We'll need to sell it, Steve immediately amended. All right, sounds good. Though, are we forgetting something? Sherry asked. I don't think so. Steve frowned as he thought it over. In the distance, Larry's body twitched. Nah, we're set, he confidently confirmed. Unbeknownst to Steve, however, in a distant countryside was a lone, rather fit shepherd boy who was looking at one of his goats. I wonder how many times I can lift my goat, the boy muttered. Then he shuddered as a wisp of orange smoke brought in by the wind entered his mouth. His skin took a slight orange hue. You have not seen the last of Chad! Chad will have his revenge. Chad must lift goats until he is extra swole again. Ah! And indeed it was not the last that Steve had seen of Chad, but that's a story for another day.